Hey there, Business for Unicorns podcast listeners. This is Mark, and I'm here to tell you about an awesome free resource on businessforunicorns.com. If you ever find yourself feeling frustrated with your training gym because you know that there are all sorts of things you could work on, but you're not really sure how to prioritize, you don't know what's the most important thing to work on or what order you should be tackling your priorities, well, now is the time to go to businessforunicorns.com, click the button, and fill out our free self-assessment. With the Ultimate Training Gym Owner Report Card, you will gain immediate clarity on just where to be focusing your attention to create more positive impact on your community, to drive more revenue and take home income, and to do it all with less stress and more peace of mind. So go to businessofunicorns.com, click the button, fill out that free self-assessment, and start building a business and life you love today.
Fitness business nerds, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. And today it's me and Pete. What's up, my friend?
Hey, this is the part where I always say thanks for having me, like I don't show up every week.
like you're an esteemed guest. No more. You're just a regular old stand-in.
I think of it like, what's the name of the guy? Is it Andy, the guy who would sit in with Conan on every single episode? Right. It's kind of like that. I'm right here just to the side.
Exactly. So today I'm excited because we're going to do basically what functions maybe part 2 or part 3 of this series, where I ask you a bunch of questions about running a sports performance gym. And I truly come at this with like wide eyes and open ears and open arms because I know nothing about that. Maybe a little bit more than nothing. I'm starting to know more as we've attracted more and more folks into Unicorn Society who run sports performance gyms. And I've learned more from you, obviously, every moment we work together. But we wanted to, dedicate a few episodes on this podcast on an ongoing basis to speaking to the unique challenges and opportunities that come with running a sports performance gym, specifically working with youth athletes and adult athletes. And so far, in the past conversations, we think we've covered the seasonality of that business model, and we talked a little bit about how to overcome for that. We've also talked about managing relationships between parents and youth athletes. And so today I want to cover another topic that we haven't talked about yet, in what I guess we'll be calling part 3 of this conversation, which is assessments. So often one of the things that I hear a lot of sports performance founders talk about who have some youth athlete or adult sports performance is how much assessing they need to do of the athlete's performance at first when they first get to know them as part of the onboarding, and how much assessment or benchmarking of their performance is useful and valuable long term. So let's start with there, Pete. You're welcome to answer the first one first and then the second one, or whatever you'd like.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one I field every day of my professional career, it seems, because one of the misconceptions that our clients, current and future, have is on the front end, they often think that we evaluate them, like formal evaluation, every single month. Mm-hmm. And what the message I try and convey to parents and athletes is that if we're doing our job properly, we're honoring the individualized programming promises we make, we're honoring our advertised client-to-coach ratios, we are appropriately staffing the gym floor and supervising sessions the way we are supposed to and insured to do, then every single training session is like a micro assessment. Mm-hmm. Because every single training session is an opportunity to loosely evaluate how the athlete is interacting with the programming. And so coaches are watching how they are progressing. They're seeing how they theoretically make progress forward from a kind of a progress as far as adding weight or more safely and effectively executing the exercises. They're watching it every single session, and they are modifying material on the fly. Now, we're not changing your program every single day, but it's not at all uncommon for an athlete to say, hey, I sprained my ankle at practice last week. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that I should or should not be doing in my program this week? And we'll make tweaks. And in a sense, these are all micro assessments. And so I'm very careful about painting a picture of us reevaluating every client formally every 30 days, every 60 days, even every 90 days. In a perfect world, if clients are training with us consistently, showing up 2 to 4 days a week, let's say, for months on end, a rescreening every 6 months would probably be an appropriate course of action. And even then, It's not a formal reevaluation. It's not like we're going to pull them back into the office and say, now tell me about your goals and let's talk about your injury history, because those things are already there in the system, in the cloud. The whole team has access to these injury histories and these files. So when I say reassessment, this is often movement screening, discussion of variables that may have shifted or will be shifting in their competitive calendar or their access to weight rooms or even their academic calendar, because that influences the way these athletes go as well.
Yep.
And I call it a rescreen most of the time. And it actually becomes a pretty valuable selling tool, a compelling way to get kids to reactivate if they've been gone for a while. Because I can say, hey, let's get you back in and let's do a complimentary rescreening. That's 15 minutes. 15 to 30 minutes is what we block for it.
Sure.
But it's not as comprehensive as a 75 to 90 minute initial evaluation. But the athlete hears complimentary evaluation, and they get excited to come in and see where they are stacking up in relation to prior performance. So the answer to your question is, I don't want to reevaluate every single month, even every quarter. But if you've disappeared for, say, 2 months or more, it's a necessity to do at a bare minimum the rescreen, and it can be a pretty useful tool for inspiring kids to take action on getting back to the weight room.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Maybe let's break down those two things in maybe a little bit more detail. So there's initial kind of onboarding screening process, and then there's the 15, 20-minute rescreen that you'll break out as needed or strategically throughout their experience. Can you just break down what's included in those two? What are you and your team actually doing? And, Sure. Even more than what you do at Cressy, what are the kinds of things other people should consider adding into those screening processes?
Yeah, first thing I'll say is that the system we run has stayed relatively the same over the years since we started this in 2007. But the minutia, the specific movement assessments or screenings that we do have varied over time. And they are right now a reflection of current trends and things that we deem to be important from a programming strategy standpoint. But the day one assessment versus the rescreen, well, day one is going to be a deep dive into injury history, a thorough discussion about training age, so exposure to the weight room, if at all. Parents are encouraged to be in the room for the initial component of this because it checks a couple boxes. I think that parents, whether they want to admit it or not, initially they trend more in the direction of helicopter parents than not. Pretty much all of us. And I get this. I mean, I found myself this morning in a meeting with our pediatrician talking over my 8-year-old son about his symptoms for a cough he's dealing with. And I had to stop myself and say, you know what? Colin knows the answers to these questions. Why am I doing this? This is everything that I hate about my professional job. And here I am doing it to him. And I stopped and I said, you know what, doctor? Address all of these questions to Colin until he appears to be unprepared to answer them. And I had to coach myself in that moment. But what happens is parents come in with a lot of questions, like tons of them. And if we say to them, hey, we'd rather you not be in the process because this is your kid's environment and they need to take ownership of it, what inevitably happens is they begrudgingly say, okay, the kid gets their assessment, the parent pays, they get in the car, and the parent asks a ton of questions. And the kid's like, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know, Dad. We didn't talk about that. And it makes us look partially unprepared, like we didn't do anything.
The kid didn't suddenly become a great salesperson for your facility in that hour.
Exactly. But this is a fine line because I want to walk those parents into the office. I want to show them the weight room, and I want to delicately say, hey, now go stand in the waiting area because I can't have you standing over the shoulder of a staff member teaching your kid how to foam roll, or standing over the shoulder of your son learning the intricacies of how to hip hinge, or whatever it is that we are teaching. I just can't have parents on the weight room floor.
Yeah.
So we give them a taste, and then we respectfully ask that they slide off onto the side, and we transition from low-key movement screens and review of injury history and discussion of goals and expectations to the weight room, where we get them properly warmed up and we prepare basically a light training session, like 40% of a traditional training session. And partially it's just because we want them to work up a little bit of a sweat and feel like they experienced strength training with us that day.
Yep.
But it's mostly because we want to see how coachable they are. How do they process the coaching cues? How aggressive can we be with the training material we prepare if we're designing it for them to do at a gym closer to home? And we need to get a feel for what we're working with. And so once that piece of the puzzle is done and we've coached them through it, it's a walk back to the front desk. We pull the parent up front, and that's when we close. We explain what we saw. We explain what optimal objectives would be from a training frequency standpoint, and then we conclude on a path moving forward. So it's kind of selling on either end of the sandwich with the user experience in the middle for the athlete. And it's not entirely uncommon for me to say to people when I'm seeing a little bit of hesitation between the parent and the kid, you know, why don't you guys discuss this on the way home and give us a call or shoot us an email in the next 24 to 48 hours, and we will design the programming according to what you give us for feedback so that they can drive home and have a debate over what is appropriate. And we'll go from there. But so that's what day one looks like in the more formal version. The rescreen, that is typically a scenario where we're abundantly familiar with their background and what they've been doing.
Yep.
And so some of that is demonstrating how much we care. Ask them about how their season went. Ask them how many innings they pitched if they're a pitcher. Ask them if they had any injuries or setbacks. Ask them how their family is. Just reactivating a dialogue with an old friend, basically. And then we'll pull old assessment notes, and if there's anything specific that we were dealing with or addressing historically, we first get a touch point there. Let's see how you look on this thing and get a feel for how they move and if there are any issues, and if they're we're really just trying to see how banged up they are coming out of their most recent season, typically. And it's somewhat informal in nature. We put them on the training table. We have a good conversation with them while we check kind of their range of motion and how they're feeling and moving. And then it's a simple, like, head over to the warm-up area, grab a foam roller, start getting yourself loose. I'm going to put together a day of material for you today based on what I saw. And they are right back and hit the ground running, regular training session from there. And we handwrite day one of their program based on what we saw. So it's considerably less formal.
Yeah, amazing. I think that's so clear, and I think the value of those two sessions, I think, was so clear in your explanation. And a few things I'll call out. I won't try to rephrase all the things you said, but things I want to call out that were so valuable was how you handle the parent. I think is genius, right? And just to have like some real pre-thought out choreography for how you bring them in, how do the thing with them, the little tap dance, and usher them over here, and then you bring them back in, right? And having that planned out and having clear expectations for their role, I think, is killer and so important. And then the thing I love about the rescreen later is that you're really treating it like a hanging out, get to know an old friend. So let's just kind of reconnect, and then assessing them based on their past performance, their past work with you in those walls, and trying to get caught up with where they've been since you last saw them. I think that framing of it makes so much sense because it's not intimidating at all. Right? It's really just saying, like, hey, we just want to get caught up, understand what you've been up to, and make sure that we can design your new programming based on all the information you give us. I think that makes so much sense, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, I've heard a few of our Unicorn Study members who do sports performance training, and they're a little fancier. They're a little more cutting edge, a little more sciencey. And some of them, it seems like, are dabbling in assessments that are not comparing individual athletes to their own performance, but comparing individual athletes to some other metrics, some other data, right? So for people of your gender, of your age, who are also pitchers, here's the metrics we're looking at. I'm just curious to get your hot take on this, because I know obviously very little about that world, but it seems to me there could be some value, and certainly could be a great selling point if you have the technology or the wherewithal to have, data where you compare individual athletes to some broader database or set of expectations. Can you just talk to me a little bit about how and when would you use that? Are you seeing more of that in this space? Is that like going to be the next frontier? Like, how do you see that?
Well, that frontier is here. Mm-hmm. I mean, we are into it. If you are not playing the tech game, you're falling behind. Yeah. And the place that it has existed in my space, how do I put this? So from a tech standpoint, mm-hmm. I think this has been most important in our pitching cage since basically the day we opened a pitching cage.
Sure.
And that was because early on there was a technology that allowed you to basically cross-reference any pitcher's delivery alongside like a major leaguer. Mm. So I could say to you, this is what the Cy Young Award winner last year did, and this is you alongside it, and you notice that he does this and you don't do this, or you do this and he does that, or you rotate at this point in the delivery and he doesn't. So that is a very common touch point. Here's how the elite of the elite do it. Let's do kind of a compare and contrast dynamic. The tech is constantly evolving in the pitching space to the point where we've got a almost $20,000 camera evaluating exactly what angle the ball is released at and how many rotations per second the ball is, demonstrating when you throw a curveball or something like that, or what the axis is, or what the total inches of break is, and all this nonsense to me.
Sounds like a lot of geometry.
But if we are not playing that game, we're not competitive in the pitching instruction space. We have to be doing that. I think that the tech that is finding its way onto the weight room floor in this realm is a little bit more fluff than maybe what we need. Like there's some great tech and it's fascinating, but a lot of it is kind of like fancy just for the sake of being fancy, and it doesn't scale really well in a semi-private setting the way we are functioning.
Sure.
When you have to set up an account for every user and you got to educate them on how to use the interface for the application, that doesn't play well when you got a bunch of 14-year-old high school athletes in the gym just kind of messing up the place and cranking through their training sessions. So scalable tech is less accessible in my mind for that space, but I'm sure it's coming. I mean, look, we've seen a lot of adjustments in the technology that hits our training floor over the last 15 years, but it's much more meaningful of a component in the pitching space than it is in the performance training space for us. The thing I will say, though, is that we're constantly working against kind of commonly understood metrics based on the sports we work with. So if you are, if you watch the NFL Combine, guys are going to do 225 bench for reps. Guys are going to test their 40. Guys are going to test their vertical. And those numbers are widely accessible. You can search what the what the best punter at the NFL Combine did for a 225 bench test, and you could theoretically hold yourself accountable to that, saying like, I should at least be as strong as the kicker on the bench press. And in the baseball space, that's 60 times, or that might be, specific velocity metrics that we're chasing, and it might be a broad jump test. So sure, we are evaluating against kind of commonly accepted standards in that space. And that is part of what we track. There are a lot of parents who come in and they say, my kid's got a showcase coming up and I would really like to shave a couple tenths of a second off of his 60 time. Can you do any work with him on sprint mechanics? Whether that is accessible or doable in a incredibly abbreviated period of time, like some parents think, or not, is debatable. But if a dad came to me today and he said, 18 months from now, I'd really like to see my son be very competitive in pursuing an opportunity to play at the college level, and I'd really love to see his 60 time improve, I'd say, wow, Dad, what a refreshing take. 18 months is a wonderful period of time for us to do some amazing things with your kids. Let's lay down some baseline metrics, and let's blow those out of the water over the next year and a half.
Yeah, good planning, Dad.
Yeah, so sure. Yes, Michael, we do measure against all of these metrics all the time. I don't know if we believe in all of them.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It strikes me, at least in the people I'm talking to who do dabble in the tech a little bit more and are using more sophisticated benchmarking tools and technology, it just seems like such a cutting-edge advantage that's going to become the expectation if it isn't already. And not being involved in the space, you're saying it actually is already here. People probably already need to be involved in using some tech in some way for benchmarking. And my guess is, not knowing anything about this space, is it's only going to get more intense in terms of that being a valuable differentiator. It's just because it strikes me as that as performance-oriented athletes, you should be able to measure the improvement in meaningful ways if you're optimizing for certain movements. And it just seems like as customers, they're going to want to go to the people who have a track record of being able to do that in ways I can see on my phone. Right?
Sure. Well, and you use the word differentiator.
Yeah.
We've kind of, in some circumstances, gone past differentiator and got to a stage of just cost of doing business.
Sure. Yeah, you're just behind the ball if you're not in that game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're talking about expensive technology. Like we're actually not far off from saying you can't run a performance training gym without force plates.
Yeah.
Like that or at least that would be the mindset, the mentality
Sure.
of a pretty considerable chunk of the potential demographic you'd like to serve. And that's frustrating because, I'm a 40-year-old now and I'm a dinosaur. And I am very much finding myself often being like, we didn't need that stuff back when we started.
Sure.
We ran a kick-ass gym in 2008 and all we had was a tape measure to measure broad jumps.
And some
so-
rocks. We just had rocks and tires. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the hardest things as us performance training facility owners get older, trying to stay at the forefront of this space and understanding what tech is worth investing in and what is kind of showy and unnecessarily complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure there's.
And I don't excel in this realm.
Yeah.
I tend to be a late adopter on these things, and my team has to bully me into them. But at least it's not like a huge blind spot. I'll admit that I'm slow.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's wrap it up with this because, I think that was plenty for our listeners. I mean, there's a lot of great takeaways in there. But I also say for anyone who's continued listening up until this point in the podcast and you are not a sports performance gym operator, I will say this conversation I hope was also valuable for you because I think the same ideas and principles that we talked about here, I think really apply to the average general population customer as well. The Gen Pop folks need to have some sense of of goals in front of them, some sense of metrics by which they're tracking their progress. Either that's I have more energy in my day, or I'm sleeping better, or I have more self-confidence, or or it is scale weight, or it is my pants fit me differently. I think that the same kind of ideas that you shared here, Pete, I think really apply to general population as well. They look different, but I think the idea of getting really clear up front about what your goals are and how we're going to track it and make your programming fit, and then over time having some sort of reassessment, people who've gone away to kind of reorient them to their goals and what their workouts look like. And I think all the way to the fact that I think even general population folks are interested in technology and tools and metrics that help them assess how they're doing, from heart rate monitors to to fancy bikes and treadmills and rowing machines that count every single part of that experience. So would you agree that I think that all these things I think really have an application in general population gyms as well?
Totally. We run the same playbook with our Gen Pop clients. We're doing rescreens.
Yeah.
We may not be testing their 60 time,
Yep.
but you said earlier in the conversation how important it is to kind of have this song and dance with the parents. And I think of this as just managing expectations and taking control of the narrative.
Yeah.
And that exists with both the athletes' parents and the Gen Pop. And by that I mean a great coach on our team will walk into the office where they know there's a client waiting for an assessment or a rescreen, and they'll say, hey, Michael, psyched you made it in. So here's how today's going to go. We're going to start in here. We're going to talk about this, this, and this. Then I'm going to give you a quick look at the space, and I'm going to ask you to come back out here, hang out while we're working through a training session. And then you and I are going to reconvene right over here near the front desk. We'll have you out the door in 75 minutes. I'll get all your questions answered. And they're like, oh, awesome. All right. I'll get up from the couch and go over there and do that now.
Yeah.
We do the same thing with Gen Pop. It's hey, Michael, we're going to go into the office. We're going to talk about your injury history. I'm going to get a feel for what you want to accomplish. And then we'll figure out if we have any targets for you. Maybe you are chasing your first unassisted pull-up. Maybe you want to do a push-up. Maybe you want to run the marathon this spring. And we're going to figure out what the metrics are that get you fired up. And then we're going to measure against them in a casual format. We're not going to put it on the marker board and say, Michael didn't hit his macros today or whatever it is, but we're going to make them feel like they are athletes just like the athletes around them in the weight room.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. I think that's a great place to end it. So, so listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Pete, geeking out about performance-based gyms, send us an email. Let us know what topic you want us to cover next. If you run a sports performance gym out there and you want us to cover more topics specific to your model, let us know. It's Michael at businessofunicorns.com, Pete at businessofunicorns.com. Thanks for this, my friend. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks for talking about my stuff this week.
Well, I hope you loved today's podcast, and forgive me, I want to remind you one more time, if you haven't already done so, head over to businessofunicorns.com, click the button, and get your free self-assessment, the ultimate training gym owner report card. I promise you, you're going to want to dig into this resource and get the support you need, finding crystal clarity on exactly where you need to be focusing to create a life and a business you love.